I prayed for a shadow, not a flame, yet the flame came all the same. The words throbbed through Jacob Thornton's mind as the train whistle cried across the Wyoming prairie, a long, lonesome sound that seemed to peel open the sky. Dust shimmered in the heat, the sun leaning low and molten over the dry land. Jacob stood stiff on the station platform, hat brim pulled low, boots powdered with grit, his hands raw from weeks of scraping life from soil that no longer wanted him. His cattle were thin, his barns weary, his heart heavier still. 3 years a widower, and the silence of his home gnawed more fiercely than hunger. He had written to the agency in a moment of desperation, asking not for beauty nor charm, but for steadiness. A plain woman, he had said, someone who would not quicken his pulse, who would not remind him of what he had already lost. He told himself such a bride would be safe. The hiss of the engine gave way to the clatter of steps as passengers spilled from the cars. A few families greeted one another with tight embraces, laughter broken by tears. Jacob waited at the edge, his body taut with dread and reluctant hope. Then the crowd shifted, and she appeared. Emma Foster descended from the train, a small leather satchel in her gloved hand. The sunlight caught her hair, red gold, alive like fire, and the hush of the station deepened as eyes turned toward her. The townsfolk whispered at once, their voices cutting sharp in the hot air. Too fine, too pretty, not for him. Jacob's heart jolted painfully, as though the very thing he had feared had been conjured from his prayer. She was no shadow. She was radiance itself, and he felt at once drawn and condemned. For a moment their gazes locked. Hers was steady, clear as mountain water, though a flicker of hurt passed when she saw him hesitate. He tipped his hat stiffly, offering his name, his voice roughened with caution. She smiled, gentle and brave, though he saw how her fingers tightened on the handle of her satchel. He loaded her bag into the wagon without a word more, and together they left the station, the murmurs of gossip trailing like burrs behind them. The road stretched dry and endless, wagon wheels crunching over stone. The air smelled of sage and sunburnt grass. Jacob kept his eyes on the horizon, speaking little, though he felt her gaze roam over the land, parched, cracked, yet stubbornly holding on. She asked small things, how many cattle remained, how far the ranch stretched. Her voice was soft, but carried a firmness that surprised him. He answered curtly, ashamed of how meager his words sounded when spoken aloud. When they reached the house, Jacob felt the hollow echo of absent stir. The front porch sagged, one shutter banged loose, and in the kitchen a chair sat forever empty, untouched since his wife's passing. Emma said nothing of it. Instead, she set her satchel down and asked where she might begin her share of the work. He told her she need not trouble herself yet, but she shook her head, untying her bonnet. A few strands of hair escaped, glinting copper in the dusk, and Jacob turned away too quickly, ashamed of the warmth that kindled in his chest. Days slipped into rhythm, though uneasily. Emma rose early, mended torn shirts, cooked meals fragrant enough to startle his dulled senses. She spoke with kindness to the ranch hands, who soon adored her. But Jacob held himself apart. At night, he sat on the porch staring at the stars, his wife's ghost heavy on his shoulders. Behind him, he sometimes heard Emma humming, a tune low and mournful, stitched with threads of courage. It unsettled him that her voice could reach the places he thought long dead. In town, the whispers grew sharper. At the mercantile, Jacob overheard a pair of women murmur, "A beauty like that? She won't stay. Mark me, she's hiding something." Another man laughed crudely, wondering what debt she paid by wedding a broken rancher. Jacob felt the sting, but said nothing, shame burning deeper than anger. He walked beside Emma through the streets, his silence a shield, though he knew it wounded her. The wound split open days later when a rider thundered into town. Silas McGraw, a gambler with eyes like black glass and a smile that cut. He swung down from his horse before the saloon, his voice carrying like a whip crack. He asked for Emma by name. She froze when she saw him, color draining from her cheeks. Silas tipped his hat mockingly. Your father's debts don't vanish, girl. He owed me more than coin, and you were the pledge. You think a paper wedding frees you? You belong to me. The street went still, townsfolk leaning from doorways, hungry for spectacle. Jacob stepped forward, but doubt clawed at him. He had failed to protect once before. His wife had died under fever he could not fight, and the guilt still shackled him. Could he stand now? His voice faltered when he told Silas to leave, and the gambler only laughed, promising he'd return. That night Emma sat by the small fire, hands trembling as she sewed. She confessed in fragments how her father's debts had chained her life, how she'd chosen to flee rather than be sold. Jacob listened, his chest aching with both pity and admiration. She had carried shame enough for 2 lifetimes, yet she faced it with a quiet strength he could barely fathom. He wanted to reach for her hand, but could not. Instead, he left a bucket of fresh water by her door before dawn, and when she found his torn coat mended on the chair, she knew he had begun to see her not as burden, but as companion. Still, Silas lingered like a storm on the horizon. Riders spotted him near the ranch, his horse a black shadow against the hills. Emma kept her head high, yet Jacob saw the fear beneath. Something hardened in him then, a slow-burning resolve. He realized he could no longer live half alive, hiding behind grief. This woman had brought light into his house, laughter into the parched rooms, and though it terrified him, he could not let it be taken. The reckoning came at dusk, wind hot and dry, the sky bruised with stormlight. Silas rode up the path, dismounting with a sneer. "I've come for what's mine." Jacob stepped from the porch, shoulders squared though his heart hammered. The ranch lay hushed around them, the cattle lowing nervously, the dust rising like smoke. Emma stood in the doorway, hands clenched. "You'll not take her," Jacob said, voice steady now, iron in the quiet. "Not her, not this land, not one more piece of my soul." Silas's grin widened. His hand hovered near his gun. For a breath the world held still, the air so tight it threatened to shatter. Then the draw. The shots cracked like lightning. Dust burst upward, acrid smoke biting the air. Jacob's bullet tore through Silas's shoulder, spinning him back. The gambler staggered, cursing, firing wild. Jacob advanced, his own grief a furnace feeding his aim. Another shot sent Silas crashing to the dirt, his pistol clattering away. He lay writhing, clutching blood, the malice draining from his face as fear replaced it. "Leave this place," Jacob said low, standing above him. "If you return, you'll not crawl away again." Silas spat, eyes burning, but he mounted with help of trembling hands and rode into the dark. Silence fell heavy after the echo of hoofs. Jacob's knees weakened, breath ragged, but before he could falter, Emma was there. She touched his hand, her eyes wet with both terror and relief. In that fragile moment the walls he had built cracked. He confessed in a whisper that he had feared her beauty, feared love itself, for it threatened to break him as loss once had. Emma laid her palm over his scarred knuckles, steady as the earth. "I didn't come here to be plain," she said softly. "I came here to be seen." The words sank deep, loosening the stones lodged in his chest. He drew a slow breath, the first in years that fell whole. Together they watched the horizon bloom with dawn, light spilling across the weary land. In the weeks that followed, the town's gossip dwindled. Silas never returned. Emma's laughter wove through the ranch like running water, and Jacob's steps grew lighter, though the land remained scarred by drought. He found joy in small things again. The smell of bread in the kitchen, the sight of her hair glinting in the sun, the feel of her hand brushing his as they worked side by side. And so, when the old souls tell the tale, they end with this: "We think we know the shapes of our prayers, but love answers in wild forms." Jacob asked for plainness, yet was given radiance. He asked for safety, yet was given fire. And in that fire he found not ruin, but the courage to live again. Remember this, listener: love does not wait for the safe road. It comes when we are willing to be broken open, and in its light, even the loneliest heart can be remade.